This is why Syrians should immigrate from their country by Tejas Karam. For over a decade, Syrians have continued to live in an unstable environment, but they continue to persevere. Hundreds of thousands of people have died in the war, earthquakes ravage northwest Syria, and their resources are scarce and hard to come by. Syrians have grown very resilient to these circumstances, but I believe that they've grown over-resilient. Over-resilience is defined by Tomas Chamorro Premusic and Derek Lusk of the Harvard Business Review by, "There is no doubt that resilience is a useful and highly adaptive trait, especially in the face of traumatic events. However, when taken too far, it may focus individuals on impossible goals or make them unnecessarily intolerant of unpleasant or counterproductive circumstances." In short, over-resilience can hurt future success, and that's what we're seeing in Syria right now. That's why many have fled the country or have become displaced, leading to the largest displacement crisis in the world. One of the leading causes to this displacement crisis is the Syrian civil war. According to Michelle Bachelet, the UN Human Rights Commissioner, there were over 350,000 identified deaths from the war. Because of that, 6.8 million people have fled the country and 6.9 million people have been internally displaced, with 5.2 million of those going to just Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon, with over 4 million in Turkey. But the conditions in these surrounding countries are not very great, and Syrians aren't wanted in these places. For example, in Turkey, Syrians are continually being dumped back into northwest Syria, and in Jordan and Lebanon, the economic problems also hurt their chance for future success. But being back in Syria isn't much better either, as according to the Human Rights Watch, humanity of extermination, murder, rape, or other forms of sexual violence, torture, and imprisonment in the context of its widespread and systematic detentions happens when refugees try to travel back to Syria. This obviously means that Syrians need to travel much further than the neighboring countries to escape the war and the conditions around them. Earthquakes have also long devastated Syria throughout its history. According to Syrian geology researchers Mohammed Reda Spenati, Raya Derewich, and Mikhail Moody, between 1365 BC and 1980, there were 181 historical earthquakes. These earthquakes can be explained by the many faults that line Syria's borders. Two of the most prolific faults are the East Anatolian and Dead Sea fault systems. The most recent 7.8 magnitude earthquake happened on the East Anatolian fault and affected southeast Turkey and northwest Syria. This earthquake resulted in 300 earthquakes in the following month and over 10,000 aftershocks. And according to the International Medical Corps, 7,000 Syrians died, and the government estimates that 8.8 million Syrians were affected. This adds to the increasingly terrible humanitarian crisis that is going on in Syria today, and added 4.9 million people in an acute need of humanitarian aid. Both the war and the earthquakes have added to the resource scarcity and the humanitarian crisis. The Syrian Arab Republic Humanitarian Needs Overview details that before the earthquake, 15.3 million of the 22.1 million people required humanitarian assistance in Syria, with 4.1 million of those in extreme or catastrophic need of assistance. Also, due to climate change, there's been droughts, low water levels and rainfall, and higher temperatures, which led to a water crisis. This water crisis made it so that 52% of Syrians today rely on unsafe water, and that led to a cholera outbreak in September of 2022. There's also a limited access to electricity and water in certain months of the year. This climate change not only reduced rainfall, but it also reduced the amount of wheat that was being produced. And coupled with the GDP downfall, from which the World Bank estimates that between 2010 and 2020, the GDP of Syria fell by 50%, food prices have skyrocketed with climate change. This leads to that there are 12.1 million food insecure Syrians because they can't afford to buy the food. and thus 85% of Syrians reported that they were unable sufficiently or completely unable to meet their basic needs. This makes it so that humanitarian aid is crucial and essential for those caught in the war and with the scarce resources. If 85% of households cannot provide basic resources for their family, it's completely evident that Syrians have become over-resilient to these unfortunate circumstances. So let's look at the Syrian definition of resilience to see how this works. CARE International, a nonprofit assisting in humanitarian crises, describes Syrian resilience in a study by saying, their main hope is for stability in this new normal and to become less reliant on absorptive and anticipatory strategies to survive. By trying to mend the broken state of Syria, many stay or return, but instead should travel to places like Canada or the US, where tens of thousands of Syrians have fled today. The Pew Research Center also identifies that millions of Syrians live scattered across Europe, with 500,000 living in Germany. This would definitely be a much better option for Syrians than choosing to stay in surrounding countries. In my mind, the only way for Syrians to have that stability they describe is by emigrating to a faraway country in search of a new beginning. Thank you.